issues, development issues, and opportunities for small island developing states for us here in the Caribbean. I am Jabari Fraser, Public Information Officer at ECLAC Caribbean. ECLAC is the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a note that we have interpretation services from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. So we ask that when you speak, both presenters and participants in the discussion, that you speak clearly and slowly so that the interpreters can deliver the message well. I would like to begin by saying that this webinar is one of our initiatives at ECLAC here to try to get media and the general public more interested in small island developing states, our issues and challenges. And we hope that this can be impactful and useful to you as working journalists and to the work that you do to get the message of small island developing states out there. So we're going to begin today with a presenter from UNDESA, and her name is Anya Thomas. She's the Economic Affairs Officer. DESA is the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and she's going to tell us a bit about the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States, the format it will take, and what the expected outcomes are. This will really lay the foundation for what you can expect next week and potential stories that you will be able to cover and develop for your audiences. Anya, are you there and are you ready for us?
Yes, I am here, although you sound very, very far away to me, but are you hearing me clearly though?
We are hearing you clearly, and we hope that the participants are able to hear you clearly. If anyone can just write in the chat and verify that you're hearing her clearly, that would be great. I hope you're hearing me a bit louder now.
Yes, this is much better than it was before. Thank you.
Great to hear. You may proceed.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to try to be very, very quick. I have been given 10 minutes for this discussion, and there's quite a bit of information to share. I do have a quick PowerPoint. Is it possible to share, or do I just need to speak?
No, that's fine. Please, you can go ahead and share your screen. You should have the permission to share your screen, so you may go ahead.
All right, so Zoom is not one of these apps that I'm particularly familiar with. We use Microsoft Teams more. So, are you seeing my screen?
Not as yet. We are waiting. It's coming.
All right. Are you?
We're seeing it now, yes.
Perfect. All right, so as everyone may know or should know by now, we are starting the 4th International Conference on SIDS on Monday, and it is taking place in St. John's, Antigua and Barbuda under the theme, Charting the Course Toward Resilient Prosperity. I think that information has been out there for some time, and there is a conference website. The link is available on the screen, and we encourage everyone to please explore that website. There is a lot of information and documents, etc., available, some of which makes for very, very interesting reading, and will certainly provide you with all of the information you need for this conference. Now, there is the point of this conference is to not only have conversations around the issues related to SIDS and the challenges that they will need to overcome as they move towards resilient prosperity, but it will also be to adopt the new program of action for SIDS. And what do I mean by this? This is a political declaration and a renewed declaration, which really will set out a program of action to move SIDS towards this resilient prosperity that they say that they want. The document is an intergovernmentally agreed document. And what does that mean? Well, it simply means that it was negotiated among all UN member states here in New York, and it will simply be adopted in the final session in Antigua and Barbuda on the last day of the conference. The document is available online also for you to have a look at and to see what are some of the actions that should be taken by all actors and international partners over the next 10 years of the life of this document. Very, very briefly, the document is an easy read. It is a very action-oriented document, which sets out a series of actions that are to be taken in a number of key areas that SIDS deem important for them to achieve this resilient prosperity. If you just want to zone in on what's the most important section to read for this document, I would suggest you go straight to section 3, which is how do SIDS get there? That particular section goes through a number of areas from resilient economies through to financing, sustainable economic growth and decent work, climate change, etc., etc. So if you read nothing else in that outcome document, please, you just focus on the section that says how SIDS get there, and that will give you a flavor of what's to come for this program of action for the next 10 years. Now, the conference itself has an opening session as per usual and as is typical for any UN conference. It has plenary sessions. It has 8 plenary sessions and 5 interactive dialogues. Standard format for UN conferences, the plenary sessions are where member states will have the opportunity to deliver national statements, and the interactive dialogues are where the very forward-looking conversations are going to take place around a few key issues that we think are pivotal in terms of advancing resilient economies in SIDS. On the screen, you will see the names of the 5 interactive dialogues, and as I said, they touch on some key areas that SIDS have long advocated for over the last 3 decades of SIDS programs of action. We have hopefully put together an excellent cast of speakers ranging from presidents and prime ministers through to very articulate ministers and heads of UN institutions who we have been nudging to push the limit on the conversation in these dialogues. And by push the limit of the conversations, we mean perhaps even go beyond what is contained in the outcome document for this conference. As really and truly for complex development issues, there are myriad of ways that you can solve them. And we really want these 5 dialogues to sort of explore that as thoroughly as they can within the 2 hours each for these dialogues. In addition to the dialogues and the plenary, there are also some really great special events that we hope, if you are able to cover them, they will also give a flavor of some of the other types of issues to be addressed in small island developing states. There is a youth summit, there's a gender equality forum, there's a global business network forum, a private sector roundtable, forum for civil society and stakeholders. And that last item on the screen, moment of declaration, is really going to be a sort of a reporting back to the plenary, the last session that is, on all of these very interesting discussions and forums that will take place across the week. The other big event in SIDS4 that is attracting everybody's attention is a high-level meeting, which is being convened under the auspices of the Office of the Secretary General on resource mobilization for SIDS. This, for the most part, is a closed meeting, or a by invitation only meeting, rather. And it is going to really tackle those tough issues for small island developing states around financing. So it will address debt sustainability, the challenges that we have with the international financial architecture. It will look at issues with multilateral development banks and so forth. The idea being to really try to ensure that resources, sustainable resources, effective resources are mobilized for small island developing states, not only to achieve this new program of action, but to address their financing issues in general over the next in the coming years. And that is on the morning of the 28th. That is an event definitely to keep on your radars in terms of coverage of the issues coming out of this discussion, because as I said, this is a by invitation only event. In addition to these other things, there are also a whole host of side events covering a lot of issues of interest to SIDS. There are 170 of them. We've tried to put together a program that will keep everyone busy, and there should be something there for everyone depending on what your interests are, spanning from the economic to the social to the environment, and you know, lots going on to keep all persons busy. There are also 30 virtual side events available to follow. So if you're not physically in Antigua and Barbuda, the virtual side events are an opportunity for persons to listen in and to follow those discussions. And all of this is available on the program, the side events program, which is on our website. Of course, for participation, let me remind all colleagues that in order to participate in this conference, like any other UN conference, you have to be duly registered. For our journalists, there was a special registration process for accredited media. This is not a conference that you can simply turn up at the gates and gain access to the compound. All persons needed to be duly registered. Again, all of this information is available or is available on the conference website. Again, as per usual UN guidelines, conference badges are going to be issued, and this is simply information on when the registration center can be accessed to gain passes for the conference itself. For journalists and media, these times also apply in terms of those who are accredited to participate in the conference. Now, in terms of access to official sessions within the conference, there are very, very strict rules for entry for the plenary session. As you can manage, this is where our presidents, prime ministers, etc. will be speaking. This is going to be very carefully managed in terms of access passes. There will be media briefings each day, which will update our accredited media and those covering the conference daily, because access to the main plenary hall is going to be significantly restricted. The interactive dialogues, however, is open access, and those accredited media and journalists participating in the conference will have access to the interactive dialogue rooms. There are no secondary access cards required. You will not, however, there's special designated seating for our media and journalists participating in this conference, which is towards the back of the room or in the overflow room that is available for these interactive dialogues. Again, for those who are covering this conference in person, we encourage you to come and sit in and listen to the conversations taking place in these interactive dialogues. Now, we have also prepared a lot of information for not just UN system, but those journalists, etc., who are covering this conference. It is available on the SIDS4 Trello board. I have the information here on the screen. We do have some specific hashtags that we would like used when writing to or referring to the conference. They are also on the screen, hashtag SIDS4 and hashtag Small Islands. There are accounts to follow, which provides lots and lots of interesting information and material about the conference, and not just the conference, but the issues and sustainable development and the issues faced by SIDS in general. Of course, I can send this presentation to the meeting organizers for this exchange, and then so you can have this at your disposal. Now, a few things to keep in mind. The venue is huge. It is a green conference, so we are encouraging folks to bring their own water bottles, to wear comfortable shoes. There's a lot of ground to cover, and as I indicated before, a lot of activities that we have tried to fill the days with for all of our participants. Again, as with any UN conference, security is going to be very, very tight. We encourage that all persons are properly accredited. I am presuming that everyone is familiar with the weather in Antigua and Barbuda as well. So it's light summer clothing, blazers for men, and dresses or blouse and skirts and pants for ladies. It is indeed a formal UN conference. And I think that's it. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anya, for your presentation. Very informative in terms of SIDS issues and how things were formulated in the lead up to SIDS4, and certainly what to expect. We're going to have a presentation now from the Director of ECLAC Caribbean, Diane Quarless. If you have any questions for Anya, please save them after Director Quarless's presentation. We're going to have those questions if you have any. Anya, just ask. I know that you have a very busy schedule, but I just ask that you hold on for a few more minutes while we have the presentation. We have the Director of ECLAC Caribbean, who herself is an expert on SIDS. She's 2011 at ECLAC Caribbean as the Director. Director, feel free to take it away once you're ready.
Thank you very much, Jabari. Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much to my colleague and friend Anya at DESA for filling in and giving us that very good overview of what we are to expect at the conference at SIDS next week. So, you know, I'm really very, very pleased and very thrilled to see that we have this wide cross-section of journalists and, you know, veteran commentators, hungry reporters, broadcasters, bloggers, TikTokers, media owners. I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. And I want to say a very warm welcome to the media in general. Talking about small island states can be a very exciting thing. And I want to, you know, explain also that, you know, there are many challenges that we face in the Caribbean and in the islands all around the world. You know, we've been talking about these challenges for a long time, and, you know, we really need to get to that point where we begin to look at solutions. No, we have the challenges, we have the opportunities, and sometimes it's difficult to consider the opportunities as shining positives given the nature of the beast, which is the climate crisis, of course, and the fact that average SIDS governments are weighed under the burden of debt, you know, averaging 40 cents on every dollar for debt service alone, average debt to GDP ratios approaching 80%. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there are opportunities. So let me just start by giving you a little bit of background history on, you know, the story of SIDS. You know, for more than 50 years, we've been debating a definition for what is a small state, and we have struggled in vain to reach a consensus on that. So there are many different numbers, and Anya is in DESA. DESA is the one that defines who the SIDS are. I think they're talking now about maybe 51 states and territories that are SIDS, although we here in the Caribbean count 26 for the Caribbean alone, and you have the Pacific, and you have the AIS group of countries as well. So there are different definitions and descriptions of who are SIDS. That's a whole story all on its own. But, you know, let's just not even bother to get bogged down in that definition. All we need to appreciate is that we're island people. And, you know, islands share similar challenges, and we're all staring down this existential barrel, you know, doomsday that we need to address frontally. So this is a critical time in the history of SIDS. We've reached a decisive moment. And if we're not even entirely sure that there will be a SIDS-5 after this SIDS-4. So we have to take action and attempt to secure the outcomes and the plans for the future. And I have to congratulate, by the way, SIDS and OHRLS and the AOSIS team that have put together a really consequential conference. All of those activities that Anya just described to you are opportunities for the leaders, not only of SIDS, because it's a global conference. So we have the Secretary General who will be participating, and representatives of the development banks, of the international financial institutions, addressing frontally the challenges that SIDS face. We have to take action to secure our own outcomes and plans for the future. So now is the time for us to make our case, you know, and for us to ensure that there's real appreciation of what it is that we are facing as SIDS, starting with the Barbuda's program of action through Mauritius and Samoa. This now is the 4th SIDS conference, and the first 3 generally were considered, in terms of their outcomes, broad-based and ambitious. But now we want to become more targeted and more specific. And this is where you're going to see it. Very much appreciating those 5 interactive dialogues that will be addressed, as well as those special forums, you know, on youth and gender equality, civil society, private sector engagement, the business forum, ensuring that there is a more targeted approach to everything that is consequential for SIDS, because we are facing a truly existential crisis. It's really, really crucial for SIDS now to seize the, you know, the reins. Let me just give you a little bit of history regarding our leadership in the existential crisis that we face, because SIDS have been the ones from the beginning that have been raising the alarm about the impact of climate change. It was, what, 35 years ago, in 1987, that the president of the Republic of Maldives delivered a powerful warning about the dangerous impact of climate change to the countries of the world at the UN General Assembly. That was in 1987. And by 2004, we had on the eve of the Mauritius International Meeting, we had that tsunami that created absolute havoc across the Indian Ocean, the SIDS in the Indian Ocean. We have the Prime Ministers Gaston Brown and Roosevelt Skerritt speaking at the General Assembly. Prime Minister Skerritt in tears after the 2017 hurricane season that left both of these countries with more than 200% debt. Their GDP was the damage caused by Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017 was more than 200% of their year's worth of income. 2 years worth of income destroyed in a matter of hours. And you think about our island musicians and our creative people who were the ones to lead the world in that now popular chant, 1.5 to stay alive. That was a landmark statement at the climate conference, the landmark climate conference in Paris, the Paris COP. 1.5 to stay alive is still the relevant chant, because if we don't get GHG levels but down below 1.5, many of our countries will not be around for a SIDS-5 if we have one. Now you think of Prime Minister Motley, with her powerful voice, riveting the world on SIDS issues. Every time she speaks, the Bridgetown Initiative, a critical platform for reshaping the international financial architecture to give SIDS a seat at the table. All of this is critical. So SIDS are leaders when it comes to the whole question of the climate crisis and climate ambition, because we are the canaries in the coal mine. We are the very first ones to feel the impact of climate change. We are the ones on the front line of the battle. So, and we're scattered across all regional groups in the Asia Pacific, in Africa, and of course here in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, we are not really limited to any one geographic area. The SIDS challenge is a global challenge. And although SIDS account for under 1% of the world's land area, less than 5% of the world's population, we are 1/5 of the membership of the UN. Because the UN is still one country, one vote. And therefore, in the context of multilateralism and international development diplomacy, we are not an insignificant group. And therefore, we deserve to have our voice heard and our issues seriously considered. And while I don't really want to spend all the time speaking about the climate crisis, I have to really, dwell on this point. One of the most critical issues, the existential threat that the climate crisis poses to our lives and our livelihoods, because it's difficult to really see the debt crisis, to really appreciate the challenge that our small size presents. But all of our island people who have been around for the past couple of decades have appreciated the impact of the hurricanes and the floods that have upended our lives, have gone back to their favorite beaches and seen the sea slowly claiming them. I know I went home to one of my favorite eating holes in Jamaica and found that the place that I used to sit on the beach to eat my favorite fish was now 10 feet in the water. Completely disappeared. We continue to contribute less than 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, driving the fuel anthropogenic climate change. And since 1970, it is estimated that SIDS have lost about 153 million, I'm sure it's more than that, because of extreme weather events. Over 60% of our countries with the highest losses are from small island developing states. I can tell you that Dorian, that hit the Bahamas recently, brought $3.1 billion in losses to that country alone because Dorian came and sat over the Bahamas. And by the time it had left, $3.4 billion worth of damage. So the climate, the 5 Cs estimates that continued climate inaction will continuously erode our GDP. By 2025, that's next year, about 10.7 billion. By 2050, 22 billion. By 2100, 46 billion. So there is an intrinsic link between the climate crisis that we face and the debt that is perhaps the greatest financial threat to our economies. And we find that there's a lot of talk in the international, when you go to the IFIs for support, they're talking about profligacy and irresponsibility. Has nothing to do with that. Has to do with the fact that, as I say, we face the rock of Sisyphus, pushing that rock up the hill as our development advances to a certain degree. We have a dramatic crisis that sends that rock right back down the hill on us. We are unable to sustain development because of the crisis that we face with our environmental vulnerability. So environmental vulnerability pushes or economic vulnerability. And we have found that there is also social vulnerability or health vulnerability, because the COVID crisis demonstrated to us the extent to which our health infrastructures are not prepared to handle that kind of crisis. And so by the time we got to the middle of COVID, our countries were on their knees. Our debt to GDP ratio was in excess of 100%. There were some countries that were as high as 160% debt to GDP ratio. And we were facing insolvency, the majority of the countries, speaking now of the Caribbean, of course. This situation has improved. Our debt to GDP ratio has fallen down now to 78%. And of course, the World Bank says that if you have a debt to GDP ratio in excess of 70%, you're in deep trouble. So the average for the Caribbean right now is 78%. We're all in trouble. And of course, many still continue to be in excess of 120%. So the debt issue, which is very closely linked to the environmental issue, continues to be a central challenge that we face. But that is not all, because we have this constant outflow of our skilled, particularly among the young. There are some countries in which by the time our young people graduate, within 3 years of graduation, they have taken off to more lucrative destinations. So what we call the brain drain is a very serious challenge. Skilled labor, or particularly in very technical fields, we're losing those people. So our institutional capacity has been constrained. Our ability, therefore, to implement, to attract the resources and to implement development projects in a way that ensures that we have that sustainability and that we can inspire the confidence in the private sector, in the resource persons that would come to the country, to our countries to invest. That is also under threat. We're facing other challenges like migration. The distressed countries outflow to other countries within the region, and the capacity of those countries to absorb and to support that migration. So we're talking about out migration for the brain drain, but also in migration in terms of refugees. These are challenges that we face in terms of physical infrastructure, which really requires significant investment of resources. You're looking at 70% of the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, that is the productive as well as housing. In other words, SIDS people live and work on the coast. In the average SIDS, within 2 miles from the coast, 70% of your infrastructure, your roads, your factories and other productive enterprises, everything where you live. Most of our SIDS live on their coast. You know what that means? That when you have a storm surge, anything coming, it creates a vulnerability all its own. And so we find ourselves always, in this recovery mode. This is another element of the vulnerability of our states. And I mean, I could go on and on about these things. We can have greater discussions in the Q&A. But I really want to emphasize, as we're speaking to journalists, I want to emphasize the role of journalism and social media influences in influencing public discussion and thought. And this is an appeal for your support and your full engagement in order to get the message out on SIDS. The media are vital for informing, educating, for leading discussions in the public square, for the social media. From the first printing press to the latest TikTok, mass comms has always been vital. And how we address these issues of SIDS and tell the stories that are now vital for SIDS4 and for the future is absolutely essential. Media in the Caribbean face difficulties, yes, covering SIDS and sustainable development, as the countries do. And the newsrooms don't have enough staff. This is everybody's story. Newsrooms don't have enough staff that can even be dedicated to SIDS or to the climate beat. And there isn't a bank of stock footage on Caribbean sea or livelihoods that you can extract on, you know, for the blues and the greens. But this is something that you can do. We need to still work on this. You know, we need to ensure that there are common images and graphics that allow for a compelling story to be communicated visually. You know, and of course, it's difficult to imagine death and many of these challenges. But, you know, we need to begin looking at it and thinking about how we solve some of these issues. Discussions have to be centered on how we combat smallness. You need to organize yourself into partnerships. Newsrooms and media owners need to be forging partnerships among other media owners in the region. Share the development stories that make news in Antigua or Jamaica, or the Lucian Marine Instagrammer must do, you know, their own part in, you know, posting or collaborating with the Vinci in their interdependent media. So we need to be talking to each other and exchanging. There needs to be a much greater cross-fertilization and sharing of information so that we speak with one voice in a very graphic and compelling way. Equip yourselves with specialists knowledgeable about sustainable development issues. Make contact with development specialists, with diplomats. We're all here. You have Anya and other colleagues in New York. You have those of us in CARICOM and other UN agencies here. Reach out to us. We're always ready to speak. You know, pester your editors to give you time to break stories on these important matters. We'll be only so happy to feed you the data. Caribbean communication and campaign strategists and youth made a huge impact during the Paris COP. You know, I was there. It was absolutely fantastic. We had musicians. I mean, it was a big, we brought, at the same time, we showed the richness of a Caribbean culture in our music and the drama and bringing what is so fantastic about islands. But at the same time, we used that magic to convey to the global community, listen, guys, you know, you see how nice this is? It's under threat. You need to pay attention to what is happening in islands. And so the media contact was absolutely fantastic. And this is what we need to see replicated over and over. So if you're covering SIDS4 in Antigua, I urge you to report vigorously on the outcome document, all of the things that have been agreed upon, to dig deeper and to get quality stories with statistics and background. But you also need to attend those interactive dialogues that Anya spoke of that are speaking to very critical issues like climate finance and critical financing and how we get partnerships involved and the importance of the human dimension in terms of youth and what we're going to be doing about the AI and the technology, how this is going to impact on the lives of SIDS going forward. Get the stories that you won't actually find in the outcome document, but that are very compelling, very important for SIDS. And so, and look for the side events that you find interesting, because, you know, increasingly more and more, a lot of the food for thought is found in those side events and not so much in those plenary meetings where they're just having, you know, these boring country statements. Yes, the country statements are important, but you get the cut and the thrust, the things that the people need to know. That, you know, there's also going to be there's one of the special event forums is on civil society, and this is an area where I really want to see the media giving that support to communicate to the man in the street that this is not something that your leaders are doing, that, you know, people in the government ministries are doing. Time for you. You're shutting me down.
Yeah, Anya is about to leave, but I just wanted to be able to open the floor for any question. If we could just squeeze in one question really quickly for her and
all
then
right.
we can get back to questions for you.
I will wrap. You can always, I'm here, so they can always come back to me. So I would just like to leave it here then, and encourage all the media to participate, not only today, but over the next week and beyond, because we should not let the SIDS discussion end with this conference. Over to you, Jabari.
Thank you very much. Anya, does anyone have any questions from the floor for Anya? If not, I'll have a quick question that I'll shoot at her. Before she leaves, she has to run off to another meeting, very busy. So any questions for her? You may raise your hand or open your mic. We have one from Linda Streaker. Linda?
Good morning, and thank you very much. Are you hearing me clearly?
Hearing you clearly. Go ahead, please.
Right. What I just wanted to find out, those of us journalists who will not be able to go to Antigua for one reason or the other, the list of speakers and other information, would we be able to get it, or we just have to go and search for it on the website that is available for see? Because we may not be able to go there to the conference, but some of these people would be people we can interview after to get the side stories that Ms. Quarless is just speaking about. So I personally would like to get a list of all the speakers so I can follow up to reach them to have interviews and share the side stories.
Anya?
Yes, that's no problem at all. I can send, that list is in the public domain. I'll forward it to Jabari. It will give you the list of speakers, not only for the plenary, but also for the interactive dialogues, and he will be able to share it with you. It's not a secret. I'll send it over to Jabari shortly.
Thank you. Any last quick question for Anya before she runs off? Anya, I just ask you one very quickly then from my end.
Sure.
Maybe you could tell us how easy or how difficult it was to agree on the draft ABAS, the draft outcome document of SIDS4, when you have so many different interests, small island interests and interests of other countries on the table to be agreed upon.
That's an excellent question, which I will deflect to my colleague Tumasie, who is on this call, I believe, from Antigua and Barbuda. You might be shocked if I share my views. So let me have Tumasie respond to that question for you. Tumasie, you're on the call, right? I hope.
Yeah.
I am here.
Please, Tumasie, take this question from me.
I perhaps will respond during my session, because I think my session is based on negotiations as an islander.
Okay, yeah, I think it's better if you get, because while Dessa was the secretariat, and of course we were involved in providing guidance to the sort of initial document before it took to the floor. Tumasie is perhaps better placed to provide you with the sort of the pulse of what was going on in the room and the thoughts and the various positions. And Tumasie, if you could just, it would also be good if you could also just indicate how, in a very frank manner, how AOSIS feels about the document now that it has been negotiated and so forth and so on. So Tumasie will answer that question for you, Jabari.
Thank you very much, Anya. We'll free you now so that you can run off to your other business. I know you have a lot on your plate, so thank you very much for presenting and for facilitating a couple of questions for us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.
So if you have any questions for Director Quarless on small island developing states and the challenges they face and the great overview that she provided for us on the issues, challenges, history of SIDS, and ideas for development journalism and storytelling on SIDS. Now is the time to ask those questions to Director Quarless. If you have a question, you may indicate by raising your hand. Yeah, Linda, you have a question? Or is that a legacy hand?
No, it's not a legacy hand. It's a question.
Okay, go ahead.
To Ms. Quarless. I must say by the end of this conference, if it's one contact detail I need is this lady, because I want to interview her on a lot of other matters. But she made mention of debt as a central issue to the SIDS. Has any study been done on debt swapping for SIDS?
Okay, so yes, so now I know that the media has not been monitoring the work of ECLAC.
Yeah, I will
Because-
confess I have not been following one of the organizations I did not follow.
Oh my goodness. No, we have done so much work on debt swapping. And in fact, we were working quite assiduously on a debt for climate adaptation swap initiative, which has morphed into an initiative adopted by actually the CARICOM Development Fund with the support of the Prime Minister of Barbados and so on. But yes, debt swapping, because what we have determined is that the challenge that the SIDS, that the Caribbean in particular has, is that because we're middle and upper income countries, there isn't a lot of concessional financing that is being made available to SIDS, regardless of the fact that ours is a critical situation that has been impacted by a vulnerability to climate. So the way in which we have sought to secure concessional financing is by linking support for climate adaptation to debt reduction. So how about we invest in adaptation and mitigation initiatives and ensure that those are used to bring down the debt. So we invest in debt reduction. We didn't actually get to that point where we actually reduce the cost of the debt, and the result in that reduction in the cost of the debt would then be invested directly into blue and green initiatives. That's the general idea of the debt swap initiative, and those continue to be very viable, and there are very successful examples of those that exist in the with Seychelles and with various countries in the Pacific. We are yet to actually do such a debt swap successfully in the Caribbean, and I think mainly it is because of the high income status and the lack of empathy for Caribbean countries because of that high income status. But we're working on it, and there's a recognition that our debt situation is so serious that there needs to be innovative solutions. One of them is what we call the LMOs, which is that we reprofile the debt and pay it off over a longer period, rather than having debt that is to be repaid at upwards of 7 and 9% over a short period of time, that we get 10 years, 20 years to repay the debt with 2 and 3% interest instead. And this results in a greater level of what it does is to reduce the debt service levels. Debt servicing is, for Antigua and Barbuda, it's 70 cents on every dollar, 70%. For every dollar, 70 cents is invested in purely repayment of debt. So this is a very, very important area of intervention, and one in which we are very actively engaged on different levels. Yeah, you need to stop me, because I will just keep going.
So-
No, I
Sorry
do
to
have a
interrupt you again.
follow-up.
Can you hold on to that question for a bit, because we have some presenters who have difficult schedules that we need to manage, and we don't want to lose them. But
Okay.
Sure.
we can hold those questions for afterwards. I'm sure Director Quarless could stay on a bit longer. Liliana?
Hi, everybody. Thanks. So yeah, Ryan, we will give you the floor after this presentation. So we have now I'm going to ask you to the Vice Minister from Cuba, Mrs. Joanna Ordizola, and Mr. Tumasie, if you can be with us or if we can swap the presentation, Raul. I don't know if you can ask the Vice Minister if she can give the floor first to Tumasie because he needs to leave, or also if she's in a rush and also she needs to leave.
Sí, buenos días. Sí, puedo estar con todo el tiempo en la webinar. Puedo permanecer
Muchas
acá.
gracias,
Muchas gracias.
viceministra. Muchísimas
Gracias.
gracias por darnos la oportunidad de hacer este cambio.
Gracias a
Entonces,
ustedes.
so now we are going to give the floor to Mr. Tumasie Blair, negotiator and Antigua and Barbuda's ambassadors to the United Nations. So Tumasie, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not the ambassador, I'm actually the deputy permanent representative. So I'm just one level below the ambassador. But good morning to everyone. I'm happy to be here. I think I would perhaps start by indicating that Antigua and Barbuda is awfully proud to be the host of SIDS4. And we take this role as hosting SIDS4 extremely seriously, given the nature of circumstances that SIDS are facing currently. And I think the role of the media is important in how we present the narrative of SIDS, how we present the impact of external shocks that SIDS are facing, in particular, those related to climate change, of course. But we can't forget the impact associated with the downturn of economies. I think I would say that Diane, my good friend, perhaps did most of my job. So she made this extremely easy for me to perhaps engage with you. And speaking from the perspective of an islander in negotiating international documents and being in negotiations with various partners, I would indicate to you that it's extremely challenging for us to continue to advocate for ourselves. I mean, you would understand that as small states, our human capacity in itself is limited. A lot of times in negotiations, especially when we're negotiating major international documents, you would have one or two representatives from an island, as opposed to large developing countries or even our developed partners, where you would have sometimes 10 and 20 negotiators coming into a room, negotiating different sections or different aspects of a document. Perhaps give you an example that I had faced several years ago in negotiating one of the financing for development outcome documents, where the negotiations in itself was a round-the-clock negotiation that ended perhaps up until 2 a.m. And while I was there, tired and trying to hold on as much as I can and fielding information from my capital in what language we can accept, we had negotiators from developing countries who would simply make a call, and you would hear, oh, I'm getting replaced in 2 hours. So my colleague will come in and tag me out and tag me in for another 2 hours, where from islanders, we have to stay there for the duration of the negotiation. And it is a lot for us. I would say, though, that we are determined at all times to ensure that the voice and the position of SIDS are maintained. Strategically, what we're able to do to perhaps mitigate some of the challenges that we face, and knowing our limitations, we do partner as groups. So sometimes we negotiate as CARICOM, and so we have a slew of negotiators supporting positions if we can agree on common positions. In addition, we negotiate as the Alliance of Small Island State, AOSIS, which Antigua and Barbuda had the honor of chairing 2 years ago. And then in a broader aspect of negotiation, not just as islanders, then we can negotiate as developing countries under the mandate of the Group of 77 and China. of course, the Group of 77 and China's position is changing a lot, as opposed to the position of islanders as larger developing countries continue to develop on a more rapid pace than island states. And so their position change, and it leaves islanders perhaps sometimes by ourselves. I think what I would indicate, and it's important for the media to recognize this, is that as islanders, we continuously indicate that we are the conscience of humanity. We are the one who are able to advocate vigorously. Our stories are believable. Our stories are oftentimes amplified. And we do get a sense of cooperation at some point in time from our developed partners. I think what the issue is, however, is that when it comes to groundbreaking and transformative changes, this is where we have difficulties. And we try to, as much as possible, lean on the support coming from the media. Antigua and Barbuda, in our hosting of SIDS4, we decided to develop a very robust media strategy. And so we had media experts, not only but media experts globally, to clearly indicate the importance of this fourth SIDS conference. And so we've gained major traction in bringing attention to this conference. We start in indicating the importance of this conference by clearly stating, and this goes along the lines that Diane had said, that this may be the last conference because there's no indication that there may be a SIDS5. But the way that we frame this conversation is that perhaps, given the current circumstances, the degree of global shocks, the degree of global unrest, the degree of the effects of climate change, the aggressiveness in storms, and the increase in temperature rise, this perhaps is the last decade that we have to save SIDS. And we say this quite seriously. We note that many islands in the Pacific Island atolls are virtually disappearing as we speak. And the impact of climate change and storms on the Caribbean islands, you would know, is vast. You would hear the story of Barbuda, where 100% of the island had to be evacuated. Up until this day, 5 to 6 years after, Barbuda is still rebuilding, and all of the inhabitants are still not relocated on Barbuda. The same story goes for Dominica, where a vast number of Dominicans are now living in Antigua and other islands. The same story goes to Bahamas, where they're still trying to recover from that massive storm. And so the media in itself is extremely important in how we try to amplify the voice and how we negotiate as small states. What we try to encourage, and developed countries are very savvy in doing this. They oftentimes slips narratives to the media to perhaps turn a story in a direction that they may wish. I don't think that we have been able to capitalize to do, and perhaps using SIDS4 as this leverage to really engage the media in the story of SIDS, but the difficulties that we're facing. I know that Anya went into details on some of the important meetings that are happening, but perhaps maybe those media houses that are attending SIDS4 that will be there in person, you have the opportunity to strategically stake out outside of some of the meeting rooms that are closed meetings. And when you see a lot of heads of states and governments, not only from SIDS, but also from the developed country, approach them, have conversation with them on what they're doing for SIDS. For instance, the meeting on the resource mobilization for SIDS is critically important. This is a meeting being convened by the Secretary General, along with Prime Minister Brown, and all heads of government of SIDS will be in attendance, along with the heads of the international financial institutions, and also the head of delegations from our developed partners. And it's a serious conversation on how you mobilize resources for SIDS, not only in implementing the 10-year framework, but also addressing the critical issues of access to finance and addressing debt sustainability of SIDS. And I want the media, when personnel are leaving that meeting, especially the Secretary General and those from the developed partners, approach them, and you ask frankly, what are you doing for SIDS? And you get them on record. And this is how we start to hold them accountable, quoting them, hearing them indicating clearly that we're going to support SIDS. And you follow up continuously, and 6 months later, a year later. Minister, you've said this. You've indicated you're going to do this. So I want to see the media engaging going forward for SIDS. And then maybe I'll just perhaps end by indicating that there are two particularly important events, launches that are taking place at SIDS4. One is the launch of the SIDS Center of Excellence, which will be based in Antigua and Barbuda. And the Center of Excellence will have three components. It will have a SIDS data hub, it will have an innovation and technology mechanism, and it will have an island investment forum. And these three features in the Center of Excellence are key in delivering the sustainable development in SIDS. We know that it lacks data, the collection of data, and the analyzing data, and how we can use data to tell our story, which is what you, the media personalities, need also. And then, using technology to address the circumstances that SIDS are facing, especially as we move towards this technological evolution and revolution, especially as it pertains to artificial intelligence. And then the Island Investment Forum, there's just this notion that SIDS are not investment worthy. We want to change that narrative, and so you, the media personnel, can help change that narrative. SIDS are investment worthy. There are opportunities not only to invest in tourism, but also to invest in the sustainable development of SIDS. I often say that SIDS are perhaps, the museums of how sustainable practices can benefit the world. And there are a lot of success stories coming out of SIDS, how we've been able to adapt to the effects of climate change and perhaps try to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. This story needs to go out, and see that SIDS are leading the way in how the world should transform in addressing climate change through investment practices. And then the final launch that we're having, and this goes to, I think, one of the questions related to debt. And we've been speaking about debt for the last 30 years, the unsustainable debt levels of SIDS for the last 30 years. This is no hidden story. We've been negotiating for the last 30 years on finding relief measures for SIDS from a global stage, and we've always heard, SIDS are too rich, you're middle and high income countries, and so you be able to achieve some and so forth. And I mean, this is nonsense. This narrative saying that that we're too rich and we don't need the support is nonsense. And so what we've decided to do is to perhaps take hold of our own debt sustainability. So we're launching this debt sustainability support service initiative at SIDS4. And what it is that we have reached out to a number of stakeholders, think tanks, the private sector, intellectuals who understand negotiation of debt clauses, legal experts who understand the legal parameters around debt, financial experts, and we've also gotten the World Bank on board as an advisor. And so what we're doing is we're providing this platform where, let's just say Tuvalu, who have been trying to negotiate or renegotiate one of his outstanding debt for the last X and years, who has been unsuccessful in that negotiation, is that we're going to offer a pool of experts free of cost, because we know that negotiating debt as islanders, while we try to negotiate a debt for $10 million, the cost of negotiation is another $2 million. And we're providing this platform free of cost, that any small island state can tap into this platform, present their debt feature, and get assistance in trying to achieve debt sustainability. And so these are the type of stories that we really want the media to come out and advocate for and tell the story of SIDS going forward. And then maybe before I end, I can answer the question that was asked regarding the negotiation, the temperature of negotiation, where we are we satisfied, and how we got to where we are. Anya did outline very clearly that the outcome document in itself is a total different outcome document that we have adopted from the 3 last SIDS conferences. For Antigua and Barbuda, we indicated clearly that this conference must be a difference, but the outcome document must be different. We do not want the same UN-type negotiated document. We wanted a document that is led by SIDS, that is owned by SIDS, and that tells the story of SIDS without little to no compromises. And so we started out a very, very ambitious document. And so we laid out the document in 3 clear terms, and I think Anya went into them. The first part of the document would state who SIDS are, where we are at this present moment, the composition of SIDS. We're telling the story of SIDS in very clear and detailed manner. The second part of the document is what do SIDS want? And in telling our stories, we're now in the document indicating clearly what we want. And then the last part of the document is how do SIDS get there? And this is the type of support that we need from the international community, not only out of our partners, but from the UN system, from the private sector, from civil society, and from you, the media also. The negotiation, I would say, was extremely tough. It was a lot of battles, I would say, having very frank, closed-door conversations, indicating very clearly that we have red lines, as SIDS, and some of the developed partners had entered the negotiation, indicating very clearly that these are the red lines. And we clearly indicated that these are our red lines also, and we will not give up until at least you understand where we are and indicate to us clearly how you intend to assist us getting to where we need to go within the next 10 years. The end result, of course, was that the document wasn't where we started at, but I think we're leaving the negotiation not 100% happy, but satisfied that we were able to accomplish most of our acts. I would say, for example, there's very strong language on climate finance. There was very strong language on access to finance for SIDS. In particular, there is a language that we have been advocating for, I would say perhaps maybe for the last 20 years, is that decisions are being made at the international financial institutions without hearing the voice of SIDS. And so oftentimes you would hear that the IFIs are pronouncing on SIDS without us being in the room. And so within the document, there's a very clear indication that there needs to be now space for SIDS at the IFIs where we can advocate for ourselves, and we can present our own situations and then negotiate on what the IFIs have to offer for us. Of course, there's language on the loss and damage fund. We indicated very clearly that we would need to have not only allocation for SIDS in terms of climate finance, but also starting from a minimum floor, whether or not it's the GCF or the loss and damage fund. You have to have a dedicated minimum for SIDS. And then once we have exhausted that minimum, we can continue to tap into the rest of the fund. And so those type of language are still would have to be negotiated going forward as they establish the loss and damage fund. But I think the end result, I would say, is that we are not 100% happy, but we are satisfied that within the next 10 years, through vigorous negotiations, that SIDS will be able to achieve a more sustained development. I will leave it as there, and I will be online for any Q&A as much as possible.
Mr. Blair, thank you very much. And I hope, Linda, that your question about the outcome document is now solved. And I know that I saw that there are 2 people in the chat, and also the director is raising her hand. So, director, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Liliana. And I forgot to welcome you at the opening because, it was a little bit frenzied. But I'm really extremely pleased that the collaboration, unique ECLAC, and I think that's something I also want to highlight. That collaboration is really fantastic, and we want to see more of that. I didn't know if we were going to lose Tumasie right here, and I just wanted to make sure that before we left, I acknowledge on behalf of all of you the excellent work that has been done by a small island state to plan a meeting of this nature, of this magnitude, of this consequence, and have to have done it with the aplomb that has been achieved by Tumasie and his ambassador, Ambassador Webson. A lot of what you will see happening in Antigua next week, the success of the meeting, and yes, you never get everything. A negotiated document is always what they call the BATNA, the best achieved outcome, you know, given the circumstances. You will never get everything that you want. But I noticed that Tumasie didn't speak about the Center of Excellence, and we have great hope for that Center of Excellence. Maybe you can just mention it, because that is going to be part of SIDS for the future in the event we don't get a SIDS 5. Something that ensures that there is continuity, that there is a place for SIDS to continue to advocate for their interests. But I really would not want us to leave this meeting without appreciating the incredible work and the effort. I think, Tumasie, you should get about a month off just to sleep nonstop after the 2 years of work in the preparation of this meeting and ensuring that it has come to this successful conclusion. I want to, you know, in Jamaican parlance, to say big up. Really excellent job done. And back to you, Liliana.
Thanks, Director. Thanks, Diane. So for the interpreters to know, I will present the next panelist in Spanish, and also that panelist is going to make her presentation in Spanish. El financiamiento al desarrollo es un desafío en Cuba y es una de las prioridades acompañadas en el marco de cooperación del Sistema de Naciones Unidas. Agradecemos a la Viceministra de Economía y Planificación de la República de Cuba, la señora Joana Odrizola, por acompañarnos y contribuir a visibilizar los desafíos que compartimos los países de América Latina y el Caribe. Señora Viceministra, le cedo la palabra. Buenos días.
Buenos días, muchas gracias. Para nosotros constituye un gran honor participar en este webinar que nos permite de alguna manera incrementar la sensibilidad que debe existir con respecto a los pequeños estados insulares en desarrollo por los desafíos y retos que enfrentan y que superan los que enfrenta el mundo en general, que ya de por sí, inmerso en las distintas crisis que tiene, pues enfrenta grandes retos. En el caso de mi país, Cuba, como parte de los pequeños estados insulares en desarrollo, estamos expuestos a las mismas vulnerabilidades geográficas, económicas, sociales que el resto de los países que tienen estas condiciones, no solo sometidos, como se ha explicado por los ponentes que me precedieron, a condiciones climatológicas adversas y sobre todo extremas que pueden en días, en horas, acabar con años de inversiones en infraestructura, en viviendas de las personas y en otras situaciones que comprometen realmente el desarrollo, sino que también por las características pequeñas, islas, por el aislamiento que tiene, por la complejidad del acceso a los financiamientos, por los temas del vínculo tan estrecho que tienen con el comercio internacional y por tanto están sometidos a los vaivenes y a los cambios que este comercio incide. Todo eso genera todavía mayores tensiones para nuestros gobiernos, para el cumplimiento de sus agendas de desarrollo. En el caso específicamente de nuestro país, como se conoce en la región de América Latina y el Caribe, porque ha sido realmente muy empático con nuestras denuncias, nuestro país está sometido desde hace varias décadas ya a sanciones unilaterales extremas, conocidas como bloqueo que impone el gobierno de Estados Unidos a nuestro país, que se recrudeció hace varios años con la administración Trump y que se ha mantenido con la administración actual, en la cual en las últimas administraciones se tomaron más de 243 medidas, muchas de las cuales fueron dirigidas sobre todo a entorpecer el desarrollo del país y fundamentalmente las fuentes propias de financiamiento o el poco acceso que teníamos a determinados financiamientos externos. Hay que decir que como parte de esas sanciones, nuestro país está excluido de los mecanismos financieros internacionales y tradicionales, lo que complejiza aún más, por supuesto, el acceso a estos fondos, y se suma a ello la injusta incorporación de nuestro país a la lista de países que supuestamente patrocinan el terrorismo, situación que, como se conoce y conocen nuestros hermanos caribeños y de América Latina, no es más que una falacia, nada más alejado de la realidad, pero que a la vez entonces ha generado que una gran cantidad de instituciones financieras y bancos con los que mi país tenía relaciones han cerrado tales relaciones y no permiten operaciones bancarias o financieras. A esto se suma, por supuesto, lo mismo que hemos sufrido el resto de los países con la situación internacional después de la COVID, que ha sido un mundo diferente, con los problemas que todavía subsisten de logística internacional y que impacta en la subida de precios de alimentos y combustibles, siendo nuestro país un país netamente importador de estos dos importantes rubros. Eso impacta directamente en la situación económica que se presenta. A lo que habría que añadir también que ciertamente los desafíos que impuso la COVID todavía se resienten en economías como las nuestras, en el caso de la economía cubana, con el logro de haber producido vacunas propias que inmunizaron a toda la población, pero que generó un gasto público que impacta en la situación del déficit fiscal que todavía hoy tenemos y que tiene, por supuesto, una repercusión en la inflación y otros fenómenos que tenemos. Sin embargo, me quiero referir específicamente al tema del financiamiento, como también ha sido mencionado por los panelistas o los ponentes anteriores. El financiamiento al desarrollo constituye un elemento crítico para lograr el cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible de los países. No puede haber cumplimiento de tales objetivos sin acceso a esos recursos. Las estimaciones de Naciones Unidas centran la necesidad de financiar esos objetivos de desarrollo sostenible entre 5.000 y 7.000 millones al año, cifras que para nuestros países son cifras significativas, pero que tienen un impacto importante para lograr realmente ir cumpliendo con cada uno de estos objetivos. Hay que decir incluso que estas cifras, que son una estimación, en el caso de los países como los nuestros, pequeños estados insulares, pueden por supuesto ser mayor, porque como decían los ponentes que me antecedieron, años y años de construcción, de infraestructura y de definiciones, de poner recursos en determinadas áreas económicas para el desarrollo de determinados sectores, pueden verse en horas destruidos por los eventos climatológicos adversos los que enfrentamos. El secretario general de Naciones Unidas ha hecho un llamado a modificar la arquitectura financiera internacional en la que cada vez hay menos financiamientos disponibles y cada vez hay más necesidad de nuestros países de hacer uso de esos financiamientos. Queríamos mencionar que en septiembre del año 2023 nuestro país, en su capital La Habana, acogió la cumbre del grupo de los 77 más China, donde el secretario general reiteró precisamente la necesidad de esa nueva arquitectura financiera más inclusiva, más equitativa y que respondiese mejor a las necesidades de los países en desarrollo. También debo decir que en los últimos tiempos nuestro país ha trabajado de manera más estrecha con el sistema de Naciones Unidas y ha tenido algunos avances que nos gustaría compartir porque pueden ser también buenas prácticas y porque tenemos el compromiso de seguir avanzando en esas líneas. En primer lugar, tenemos un marco de cooperación vigente en el cual el financiamiento al desarrollo constituye un pilar fundamental. Aprobamos de conjunto con CEPAL y el PNUD el programa conjunto denominado Apoyo a la Conformación de un Marco Nacional Integrado de Financiamiento de los ODS, conocido por sus siglas CIFRA, que realmente marcó un hito en las posibilidades para evaluar las capacidades que tenemos, las herramientas innovadoras. Se habló de recomendaciones de política en el término de cómo ampliar las exportaciones que realmente para nosotros, los países pequeños insulares, la inversión extranjera y las exportaciones constituyen dos fuentes importantes de ingresos, pero con la situación pequeña que enfrentamos, con las situaciones de infraestructura, con el costo que tiene para nosotros la transportación internacional, se vuelven aún más desafiantes los retos en esta materia para poder atraer esos flujos. Sin embargo, hay que decir que este programa Cifra también ganó el SIDS Partnership Award precisamente porque por la mención a la posibilidad de cómo se pueden lograr alianzas cada día más estratégicas que nos permitan desde nuestras dimensiones convertirnos en bloques mucho más fortalecidos, en el que las buenas prácticas y en el que la unión entre todos a partir de nuestra diversidad pueda ser un pilar fundamental para ir logrando esos objetivos de desarrollo. Cuando hablamos, por ejemplo, de actividades que son vitales para nuestros países, como el turismo, tenemos que hablar entonces de multidestinos y tenemos que hablar de hacer alianzas importantes que nos permitan precisamente visibilizar esta región nuestra del Caribe, las potencialidades que tiene, como se decía, en la cultura, en la gastronomía, en su población, pero esto debemos hacerlo sorteando las brechas que nos impone la situación de ser un pequeño país insular. También es importante decir que para nosotros todo lo que se ha venido desarrollando en el ámbito internacional sobre las finanzas ambientales constituye una oportunidad y hemos empezado a dar pasos al respecto, teniendo en cuenta que ha sido una prioridad para el Estado nuestro, que hay un plan de Estado denominado Tarea Vida, que tiene como prioridad mitigar los efectos del cambio climático y que esta oportunidad que existe en el mundo de las finanzas verdes, a nuestro juicio, debe ser algo que debemos potenciar y que debemos tratar de que con herramientas innovadoras nos permita acceder a fuentes de financiamiento que no estén atadas a los mecanismos tradicionales, precisamente por las condiciones diferentes que enfrentamos como país. También es importante decir que en nuestro caso estamos dando los primeros pasos con instituciones financieras y bancos regionales, como puede ser con la CAF o con el BCE, a partir de ir evaluando las potencialidades que nosotros tenemos. En el caso del BCE es una operación inicial que tiene que ver con el sector de la biotecnología, siendo nuestro país un referente en estos temas por el desarrollo que ha tenido, pero en el cual ciertamente todos estos temas demandan nuevamente de financiamiento. Por tanto, para nosotros es vital que estas conferencias pongan el elemento del financiamiento al desarrollo como un elemento clave, que se hable no solo de los mecanismos tradicionales existentes hoy, sino que podamos hablar de otros mecanismos diferenciados por la condición que tenemos los pequeños estados insulares y de la posibilidad que también nos dan espacios como este, como la conferencia y como el resto de los eventos de los que se hablaba al inicio, que van a girar en torno a esta temática para fortalecer nuestras alianzas, para buscar en qué puntos somos fuertes, en qué punto podemos lograr que nuestros países vayan sorteando estos desafíos y estos retos que hoy enfrentamos. Agradecer nuevamente la invitación a un espacio como este y pueden contar, por supuesto, con nuestro país, con la experiencia que podamos tener y estamos siempre prestos a aprender del resto de las experiencias de nuestros países hermanos de América Latina y el Caribe. Muchas gracias.
Señora viceministra, muchísimas gracias por su intervención. Vamos a dar paso entonces a una pregunta. Si hay alguna pregunta de las personas en línea, por favor, levanten su mano. Linda, I see your hand. Is a question for the Vice Minister? No. And Tumasie, you still there?
Estoy faltando.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if there's no questions for the Vice Minister or for Tumasie, we are moving forward because we have, I mean, the agenda is really tight now. So thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias.
Can I just make one point?
Viceministra Drizola. Sorry? There's a question.
Tumasie.
No, Tumasie is the one
No,
that's...
no,
yeah,
not a
please.
question, just to make one point to the media. And I think this is important for the media to note that this SIDS conference, this fourth SIDS conference, would be the conference with the highest amount of not only delegates participating, but VVIPs and VIPs. And I'll give you some figures. There will be an estimated around 4,000 participants. So far, there are around 3,300 participants, delegates already registered for the conference. There's an expectation that we will have around 400 to 600 in-person registration. In addition to that, we have 26 head of state and governments attending, and we have, at the last count, almost 60 ministers attending SIDS4 also. So I just want to indicate to the media the level of high attendance for SIDS4, the amount of attention SIDS4 is getting, but the seriousness that many countries are taking into SIDS4, and there's an opportunity for the media to engage with all these high-level officials.
Tumasie, thank you very much for raising that number. So I think that you are quite busy now for this moment and the next week. So thank you very much. Now we're moving to our next panelist, also in Spanish. Quiero dar la bienvenida a Pablo Correa, editor de Medio Ambiente del periódico El Espectador de Colombia. Pablo, gracias por aceptar esta invitación.
Hola Liliana, hola a todo el panel. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm going to speak in Spanish because I'm more coherent in Spanish than in English. Sorry for that, for all the folks that are not native English speakers. Bueno, con esta invitación, Liliana pues me pidió que me puso, digamos, a repasar un poco mis inicios, mi vida como periodista ambiental. Yo soy de Colombia, estuve trabajando 20 años, ya no soy el editor de temas de ciencia y medio ambiente del Espectador, renuncié hace 2 años, pero estuve en el Espectador desde 2004 hasta el 2021 como editor de salud, ciencia y medio ambiente. Y bueno, cuando me invitaste a esto, me puse a recordar esa primera conferencia de cambio climático en 2007 en Copenhague y otras, Río más 20, la COP de París y la experiencia que eso, digamos, el gran aprendizaje. Yo creo que atender una cumbre de cambio climático o de biodiversidad o cualquiera de estas cumbres internacionales en torno a temas ambientales. Yo creo que lo primero para nosotros los periodistas es que es un gran aprendizaje, o sea, la oportunidad de tener cerca los actores políticos, sociedad civil, ONGs en las que uno empieza como a construir, a tomarle el pulso, digamos, a cómo está avanzando el pensamiento en torno a los problemas climáticos en el mundo. Pero realmente sobre lo que me gustaría llamar la atención, pues, de todos mis colegas esta vez, es que, esperen que por aquí anoté lo que quería compartir con ustedes. Yo, para no demorarme mucho, yo creo que 20 años después de que yo empecé a hacer este periodismo ambiental, hoy miro hacia atrás y lo que creo es que tenemos un reto todos de reformular la agenda del periodismo ambiental. O sea, tenemos que reinventar la forma en que se ha construido el periodismo ambiental en Latinoamérica. Yo creo que fue mi generación y las generaciones previas cumplimos un rol, lo hicimos de cierta manera como creíamos. Yo creo que se logró elevar la conciencia de la población sobre los diferentes retos ambientales, pero yo creo que la tarea ni está completa ni está bien hecha del todo. Entonces, tengo 5 elementos que quiero destacar. A ver si logramos entre todos ver cómo tomamos lo mejor del periodismo ambiental del pasado, pero lo reinventamos o lo reinventan las nuevas generaciones. Uno, ¿cómo hacemos para que la agenda del periodismo ambiental se desplace más hacia un periodismo de soluciones? O sea, lo que ha pasado en 20, 30, 40 años de periodismo ambiental fue que nos dedicamos a denunciar los problemas, los conflictos socioambientales, a decir lo que estaba mal, a decir lo que no funciona, pero eso creó apatía, eso creó pesimismo en la sociedad, eso creó inacción y nos olvidamos de contar las historias de las cosas que sí funcionan. Entonces, ese es uno. ¿Qué hacemos para concentrar más atención, más esfuerzos, más trabajo en periodismo de soluciones en términos ambientales? Una, yo tengo una intuición, a mí me está preocupando que una gran parte de la agenda ambiental hoy se está desplazando. Hay una especie de judicialización de la agenda ambiental. Hay entidades internacionales, nacionales, poniendo dinero para becas de periodismo, financiando a los periodistas, pero esa agenda está demandando historias en las que son procesos más de investigación y una de crimen asociado a ambiente, pero eso es de alguna manera continuar con, claro, eso es necesario y eso está pasando. El problema es que abusamos de eso, la mayoría están allí, eso es lo que se está financiando. Y de nuevo se está olvidando contar muchas otras historias que hacen, que podrían revitalizar la relación de los ciudadanos con la naturaleza. Entonces, si todo es malo y si se centra la atención y los esfuerzos en esa judicialización de la agenda ambiental, a mí eso me parece problemático. Un ejemplo sencillo, yo vivo en un país como Colombia, la mitad del bosque, Amazonía, y muchos de los esfuerzos que se financian es para quién es el que está tumbando la selva, quién es este, pero ninguno de esos periodistas ambientales o muy pocos nos cuentan quiénes sí están haciendo bien su trabajo por la selva, en procesos de reforestación, en historias de economías verdes, etcétera. Tercero, ese sesgo pesimista, el sesgo pesimista que los periodistas le estamos transmitiendo a la sociedad nos está generando apatía, en muchos países la credibilidad en los medios ha caído 40% y el news avoidance, o sea, la gente que no quiere saber de noticias, tiene que ver con esa selección de las historias que hacemos. Cuarto, y se dan cuenta, todo esto ha ido quedando relacionado, lo peligroso que son las narrativas de buenos y malos. Seguimos construyendo historias ambientales en las que hay unos buenos y hay unos malos. Y yo veo a muchos de mis colegas, muchos de los que van a las conferencias ambientales con esa mirada a señalar como jueces a los demás y eso parte de la misma hipocresía nuestra y la falta de coherencia de nosotros mismos como periodistas. O sea, yo veo muchos colegas que van hasta Dubái, van a otros países, viajan 15, 20 horas a convertir a una parte de la, así, a criticar directamente, por ejemplo, a la industria petrolera, pero pues se les olvida que toda nuestra vida está por ahora dependiendo de una economía de energías fósiles que no hemos logrado transitar hacia las economías verdes. ¿Por qué? Pues por 10.000 razones, además de los intereses, porque es difícil, porque toma tiempo, por problemas tecnológicos, porque tampoco ayudamos a contar la historia de los que lo están haciendo bien y mejor. Entonces esa narrativa de buenos y malos me parece peligrosa y los periodistas aislándose como jueces de esas dinámicas tan complejas de lo que significa transformar una sociedad hacia unas sociedades más sostenibles. Y por último, yo mencionaría el reto que tenemos todos de llevar el periodismo ambiental más allá de las páginas de medio ambiente. O sea, yo creo que el periodismo ambiental tiene que ser un periodismo que se incruste, que se inserte, que migre a las secciones de economía. El periodismo ambiental tiene que estar en las secciones de economía discutiendo las transiciones energéticas, discutiendo los problemas que toda la reorganización social, económica que debe haber para tener una sociedad sostenible, una economía sostenible, eh, tiene que migrar a las páginas de cultura, tiene que expandirse, salir de periodistas ambientales hablándole a ambientalistas. Eso va a crear una comunidad así de chiquita y necesitamos romper esas barreras, entender que el periodismo ambiental es un periodismo que tiene que hablar de la economía y la política a mayor escala. Y eso también incluye entender que no nos podemos limitar a tener cuidado con con cómo construimos esa agenda, porque, por ejemplo, desde muchas instituciones internacionales también, muchos gobiernos, miren cómo los periodistas a veces dejamos que se construyera la agenda hacia un lado y se nos olvidaron temas. Entonces, el cambio climático, por ejemplo, logró una gran preponderancia, ya no hay duda, pues en todas partes se habla de eso, pero se minimizó la crisis por pérdida de biodiversidad, olvidamos otros de los componentes que finalmente se suman para crear una crisis ambiental global. Entonces, mi invitación, esto eran lo que les dije, como unas 5 puntos que yo creo que son retos que para los que no hay respuesta, que ningún periodista o ningún medio los ha resuelto completamente. Y lo interesante de esto es que es un reto para todos los que estamos trabajando en esto. ¿Cómo hacemos para quedarnos con los mejores valores, los mejores aprendizajes del periodismo ambiental de los últimos 20 años en Latinoamérica, pero entender que ese periodismo tampoco ayudó a solucionar los problemas que tiene nuestra sociedad y el mundo, y necesitamos hacer ajustes profundos para transitar un periodismo ambiental que que sea autorreflexivo, que se dé cuenta también de las cosas que ha hecho mal y que no funcionan, porque así como criticamos a los demás, también los periodistas ambientales tenemos que ajustar la forma en que hacemos nuestro trabajo. He visto en muchos momentos y colegas que esta sensación de sentirse héroe por ser el periodista ambiental, el que denuncia, se empezó a volver problemática porque se perdió humildad, porque no hubo autocrítica, porque tampoco hay mucho deseo de ajustar las cosas que no están bien. Y la verdad es que ustedes ya escucharon y han visto en otros lados, pues el tiempo está corriendo y pues yo creo que también nosotros deberíamos hacer eso. Esa es como mi invitación y bueno, muchas gracias Liliana por este espacio.
Reflexiones que a todos los asistentes y colegas nos sirve un montón escucharlas. Doy la palabra entonces a Yavari para continuar con nuestra agenda.
Thank you, Liliana. I'd just like to continue now by introducing two of the presenters that we have to continue the discussion among journalists. We have journalists from the Caribbean. We have both Ryan Bachoo from Trinidad and Tobago and Deandre Williamson from the Bahamas, who are standing by to share their experiences on attending multilateral negotiations and UN meetings. And they can give a few tips to other journalists on what they have to say. But before I continue with both of you, though, I know people may be tight for time. I see a hand raised from Dennis Chabrol from Guyana. Dennis, you want to just give us a question and maybe we can answer it now or a bit later, depending on who it may be for and if they have to run. Dennis?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. It's just a comment, really, that with all that has been said during this morning's discussion, one has to take into consideration that information is beyond the headlines, and therefore millions and even billions of dollars are spent globally with respect to all of these programs and projects around the world, but little or nothing is being done to sustain the messaging so that you get actual public buy-in beyond the news headlines. And therefore, I think international and regional organizations need to focus a lot more on what can and should be done beyond the headlines. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input there. We just, even though we had our agenda planned and timing planned, because we are juggling a lot and people's different schedules, we are just kind of freestyling a bit. Maybe, Ryan, you want to start with your presentation now, and then we can get some more questions, and then we move on to Deandre, right?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jabari. Good morning to everyone. Afternoon, wherever you are as well. Let me just try to share my screen and hopefully this works. All right, there we go. Let me just see this. Okay, so I'm looking for the presentation, which is not coming up. Okay, so how do I do this? Okay, there we go. So there we go, there's the presentation. And just confirming, Jabari, that you are seeing it on your end, right?
We are seeing it, yes. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. All right. So guys, just to be very brief, thank you very much for the opportunity to present at this ECLAC webinar. Covering the global negotiation process, I know that a lot of us who are in the media already know a little bit about it. And it's not that you had to be at one of these global negotiations or you had to be at a United Nations conference. Growing up, we would have heard about it on CNN, on BBC, on Fox, or whatever network that you watch. We would have heard about it. This is what geopolitics is about. It's in your face all the time. However, covering it, I can tell you, is so much different, so much more complex and vast. And so over the next few minutes, I just want to give you my experience and some tips from what I've learned in covering these negotiations. And first of all, I just want to recap. And I know that we had some really good presentations that preceded me. None better, I feel, than Pablo, who was so excellent in his analysis of the media in its coverage of not just climate change, but the environment. So Pablo, excellent presentation from you. So each year, our climate negotiators meet at different locations around the world to discuss this issue that they call climate change, right? The working tools for these negotiations, the working texts for these negotiations. It's based on written proposals. Tumasie was here a little bit before. We heard that he spent a couple of years working on the text for this SIDS conference. But it's important to understand, because I feel like a lot of younger journalists who are entering climate journalism feel that COP is the only meeting that matters. It's far from it. There are so many different meetings. There was a very important meeting in Copenhagen last week in Denmark ahead of COP. So there are many of these meetings. Since it's another important meeting, COP isn't the only one. There are many other negotiating meetings that happen in different pockets of the world that are definitely worth covering. There's a biodiversity COP that's happening a little bit later on in the year as well. And one of the common questions that I get is, do these negotiations actually make sense? It's a great question. It's a very interesting question. It's a very relevant question as to whether these negotiations are actually taking us to the point that we need to be at. Because a lot of people could say after almost 3 decades of COPs, we're still on a very bad trajectory when it comes to climate change and limiting global temperatures and the release of global carbon emissions. Now, the short answer is, while the negotiation process and the COP process may not be the best process, it is the best process that we have right now. I'm not sure if that makes sense to people, but yes, it may not actually be working as fast as we want it to work. It may not be accelerating at the speed we want it to be at. But right now, this is the best process that the world has with regards to the UNFCCC framework convention. This is the best that we have right now, and this is what we have to work with. Like everything in life, we have to continue refining it. We have to continue getting better at it. But when it seems that, we're not getting anywhere, we have actually gotten to a lot of places over the last 28 COPs. The process isn't, terrific. It needs refining. Yes, no process is perfect, but this is the best we have right now. So in covering these conferences, you can feel very overwhelmed. I'm sure a few of you in this webinar will be headed off to Antigua and Barbuda to cover the SIDS conference. And even that one, it may not be COP whether you have 100,000 registrants. You may have 4,000 people headed to that. But it still can feel very overwhelming because there are multiple meetings taking place. There are meetings, you're not sure which meeting is more important, which one you should be covering, what are the different issues that, there are so many different issues being tackled at the same time. The halls are flooded with people, important people who you feel that you should know, who you don't probably know. You're trying to get to know people. The language of the text is often complex and complicated, and you're not sure what to make of it, what you should be focusing on. It's all very, it could be all overwhelming. But what I wanted to do is to give you some of my suggestions, having been at COP27 and COP28. One of the first suggestions that I always give to people is to read. The second one I also give is to read, and the third one, keep reading. Familiarize yourself with the text of the UNFCCC. Familiarize yourself with the text of SIDS4 if you're heading to SIDS4, or even if you're not heading to SIDS4, please familiarize yourself with the text. If you don't understand it after reading it once or twice or 3 times, it's absolutely fine. There are people I've met who have been to 8, 9, 10 COPs and they're still not perfect in understanding and comprehending the text. All right, and that's fine. It's a constant work in progress. It's a constant learning process. So familiarize yourself with the text, get to know the text, get to know the language of the text, the technical terms, Google it, research it, ask people like Diane, who is in this, always on this call. These are excellent people to have as resources who can explain it to you. Tumasie is another excellent person. Now, another key thing that I think we take for granted is keeping abreast of climate change issues. Pablo gave an excellent presentation, and this is being streamed live on Facebook. And if you missed any part of it, or you should probably look at it a second time, I thought he was excellent. Keeping abreast of international affairs, domestic affairs, regional affairs when it comes to climate change is critical. I've challenged myself because Diane alluded to it. Excellent statement you made, Diane. In our newsrooms in the Caribbean, we don't tend to have time to be covering climate change. Climate change is that other thing because there's crime, there's business news, there's political news. All of those things take at the forefront. All of those things are priority. Our journalists don't really tend to have the time. They have to do it on their time or when there is time. But in order to counteract that, I've challenged myself and I challenge you as well, read at least one climate change story per day, whether it is an international climate story, whether it is a domestic climate story, whether it's a regional climate story. Challenge yourself so that you keep abreast of the news. Like yesterday, there was a major ruling in a Hamburg court when it comes to oceans, all right, and protecting the nation's oceans, a landmark judgment, all right? So challenge yourself to read at least one a day to stay abreast of the news. But when it comes to covering climate change, you can't cover climate change without reading, whether it's the text or whether it is articles or submissions or papers or scholarly articles. All right, let me just move on. When you head to these conferences, and for those of you heading to SIDS, for those of you heading to COP later on this year, it's important that you don't frustrate yourself. If you're attending these conferences, you have to be patient with yourself. If it's your first time, it can take up to 3 days to figure out what is actually going on and your method of approach. It might sound like, you know, this is something that you don't have time for, it's impossible. When I went to COP27 in Egypt, it took me 2 days and 1 morning to actually figure out, you know, what I was doing. And later on that 3rd day, I was actually talking to a veteran COP attendee who told me, oh yeah, that's normal. You don't know what's going on for the first 3 days. You have to figure it out. And by the 3rd day, you should be fine. And he was right. So be patient with yourself. Don't get frustrated. It is overwhelming. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of people. You feel like you're not doing enough. You think that you should be doing a lot more because there is so much happening in that one space. But be patient with yourself and don't frustrate yourself because you'll end up doing a lot less than you ought to be doing. So another key thing is that when I say don't frustrate yourself, it leads into this point. Because these conferences are so huge, what you need to do is you need to focus on what you are there for. All right, this is the bigger networks get this excellently because you're at SIDS4, and I understand that CNN and BBC have a big interest in SIDS4, and you're standing next to BBC or you're standing next to a CNN reporter, and their agenda for SIDS is not the same as yours. All right, because we come from small island developing states. All right, our islands, right, are fractions of what their cities are. So you have to maintain blinkers when it comes to what you are there for. For us, Tumasie gave some excellent examples of what to look out for. Climate finance. He mentioned the loss and damage fund. All right, I'm interested to see where we have an adopted loss and damage fund. I want to see where the conversation goes at this SIDS4 because the loss and damage fund really is for us, small island developing states. So be laser visioned into what you are there for because it's very easy at these conferences to get lost into what the bigger nations are doing. And it's important, it is important that you keep abreast of what India is important. India uses the most coal in the world. So yes, they're absolutely important. The United States will always be important because they're the highest producers of liquefied natural gas in the world. Absolutely important. But we have to stay focused on what we are there for, and the stories that matter to our people. All right, because there is already CNN and BBC and Fox and MSNBC covering for their networks. So what I did was I took a screenshot of what I'd like to say is a plan. You need to go there with a plan of coverage. And that what I noticed at COP28, having covered COP27, is when you go with a plan, it sort of helps you in those first few days when not a lot is happening or you're not getting a lot of stories, you're taking too long to settle down. You got a plan. So this picture on, I believe it's your right or your left, this was my plan for COP28. And what I did was COP28 started on a Thursday, and I did check boxes. And every day for that conference, what I tried to do was I tried to do a checkbox the night before I went to bed of everything that I wanted to accomplish. So interviews that I wanted to get, stories that I wanted to tell, things that I ought to have done to remind myself if I had reports. So I see some of our television journalists are in this webinar. For you guys might have live reports to do. So, you know, and I try to tick as I go along through the day. And that way it sort of makes you feel like you're accomplishing things. Because like I said, if you're there and you're not writing stories, you're not publishing stories, you could feel, well, you know, I'm just wasting my time here. Why did I even come? You know, I'm frustrated. Have a plan. You know, even if you don't stick to the plan and the plan evolutionizes and you have another, you know, you get a bigger interview or things change, that's fine. But you still have something to fall back on, which is a plan. Next one. Right. Build your contact base even before you arrive in Antigua and Barbuda, even before you arrive in Azerbaijan later on this year, if you're headed to the Biodiversity COP. Build your contact base before. Get to know your lead climate negotiator, make friends with them, and so that you'll be able to reach out to them when you get there and you can get as much information as possible. These guys are always really nice people. In fact, they're such nice people that once you get them as a contact, if you're missing something or something major is happening, chances are they'll pick up their phone and they'll say, you need to come here right now. There's a protest, or the Secretary General is about to deliver a statement, or the Executive Secretary is about to hold a press conference. So they will help you as much as you would be able to get their stories published. So build your contact base before, whether it's the minister, whether it's the prime minister, whether it's the lead negotiators, whether it's negotiators, whoever it is, build your contact base before. All right, so a couple of things to keep remembering, all right? And this might sound weird coming from somebody who covers climate change, but climate change is complex, it's complicated, and it's boring, all right? Let's not, because we cover climate change in this webinar, do not take it for granted. Outside there, to the people reading it, viewing it, listening to it on radio, it's boring. So we have to remember that we have to humanize our climate change reporting. Pablo made some excellent points in his presentation about revolutionizing, not doing environmental journalism the way they used to do it three decades ago. Let's humanize our stories, all the technical terms that people don't understand and all of the big words that come out of climate change glossary. Let's dispense of that and let's bring it down to a human level. Let's find a way to connect our stories with what is impacting our human lives around the Caribbean region. We've just been through some scorching sun throughout the dry season, and there's a tumultuous rainy season to come. Also, please keep re-emphasizing why it is so, the story you are telling us is so important, because people will keep asking, why is this important to me? You know, this doesn't make sense to me. This sounds complicated and this sounds boring. Why is this important to me? Remember to also highlight the progress. At these conferences, I know we tend to cover doom and gloom as a media. And yes, there is a lot of doom and gloom. Yes, we're on a bad trajectory. Yes, we're not doing enough. Yes, we're midway through this decade and we're nowhere near the goals that we've set for ourselves. Yes, we're not meeting the Paris Agreement. Yes, the global stocktake was a slap in the face to everyone. But there are a lot of good things happening when it comes to the climate change movement as well. There are good things happening out of these conferences, right? So as much as you highlight the negatives and the challenges and the things, the goals that are not being met, also highlight the progress, also highlight the successes, give hope, because there is a lot of hope happening as well. I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity, for listening to me, and as well for the opportunity to share a little bit of my experience in covering these United Nations climate change conferences. I'm around if you guys have any questions, but Jabari, thanks a lot for the opportunity to share some of my experience at this very important juncture.
Thank you very much, Ryan. We will move Right now, on to Deandre Williamson, who is a journalist from the Bahamas and who has covered the UN General Assembly, had a bit of different experience that we'd like to share with you. Stay tuned. I see the numbers are starting to drop. We're running a little over time, but we're going to finish soon. Don't worry.
Hi everyone. Hi Jabari. Thank you all for having me here to share my experience with my coverage of the UN General Assembly last year. Okay. Let me get my presentation up right here.
While she gets the presentation ready, let me just tell you that after her presentation, we'd take any questions that you have, any of the presenters previously. You could continue to get your presentation ready. I'm just letting people know what's coming next. And after that, we will have some very brief elevator pitches, essentially, of some different events going on at SIDS4 and of some different campaigns that are aligned with SIDS4 that we have going on at the moment. So I don't know, is your presentation ready? If not, you're on mute now.
I'm trying to share my screen. I don't know what's going on. It's not
sharing. Let's just check the permissions here on our end. No restrictions there, so you should be able to share it.
Strange.
No, we're not seeing it.
I believe we also have that presentation on standby. Maybe we could open it up. I don't know if it has changed much since the last time you sent it us.
You could open it. I just changed one slide. That's it. But you could open it from your end. Since it's not allowing me. I don't know why.
Right. We're getting it open now so that we can get your presentation on the way. It's coming up shortly. Loading. All right, you should be able to see it very soon.
Okay. This thing is ask me for what kind of passwords and stuff. Let me just
be on the screen now, so you may go ahead.
Okay, cool. All right, great. So I'm Deandre Williamson. I'm a journalist here in Nassau, Bahamas, and I was privileged to cover the United Nations General Assembly last year as a RAF fellow. Can you go to the next screen, please? Okay, there are several fellows who were selected. Next screen, from small island developing states. And I participated in the 2023 program, the Reham Alfara Journalism Program. Go on, next slide. Right. And it was in person in New York. And I also participated in 2021. It was done virtually. And I was also selected again, like I said, to be a part of the program. It's a three-way program and for journalists from developing countries. It's about 12 of us were selected from the countries here in the global South. We're important. I was the only one from the Caribbean selected. So that was big for me. I had a big task on my hand to cover the assembly. Next slide. And during this time, when you're covering the General Assembly and other UN conferences, you get to meet top UN officials and you get to interview them and talk about issues in your country and around the world. And here I met the president of the General Assembly. His name is Dennis Francis of Trinidad and Tobago. Next slide. And I also met Selwyn Hart. He is a special advisor to the Secretary General on climate change. He's from Barbuda. And during his presentation to fellows, he charged us. He was like, journalists from developing countries like you all, you need to do more climate reporting, more climate storytelling. And I was like, he was aiming his charge directly at me because I'm from the Caribbean. And I was like, sir, we have our challenges in the media, like you all mentioned before. And sometimes it's hard, but he was like, still try to persevere and push through and really get the story of climate out to the world so that we could get the attention that we need. And we also met the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Amina Mohammed. And one of the important highlights of this fellowship for me was being a part of the SDG Media Zone right here. I had the opportunity to moderate a session in the SDG Media Zone on Act Now for a Common Future. And that is also going to be a feature at the SIDS4 conference, the SDG Media Zone. And in the SDG Media Zone at SIDS4, they're going to be discussing climate change, climate finance, issues for development and youth engagement, digital technologies. It's going to be really great. So I encourage you all to go to the SDG Media Zone to be involved in topics and discussions on climate change and how people are really promoting the SDGs in their country and around the world. Another opportunity I had, which I really enjoyed during my coverage at UNGA, was participating in the SDG Roundup show. That's a show done by UN News whereby we discuss the day's events at the UN headquarters, like what were the major events, what happened, what took place, that journalists should be paying attention to and what the world needs to know. So that was great for me as well. And I hope something like that UN News will be doing, I'm not sure, at SIDS4 in Antigua. Next slide. All right, the next thing we had also too was a big feature that's going to be also at SIDS4, the daily press briefings. When you cover the daily press briefings during our UNGA, the press briefings were at noon, and I participated in it as much as I can. And during SIDS4, the press briefing will be at 1:30 as the average time, some other times also, but this is the average time. And I encourage journalists to ask questions, come prepared to ask questions about what's going on, know the events that took place during the day, know that the key negotiations and discussions that took place during the day so that you can be able to ask informed questions. Also be familiar with the current issues facing SIDS in the Caribbean and around the world so you can ask questions based on what you know. So these press briefings are a must and is mandatory. And then when you get to the General Assembly here, I covered my Minister of Foreign Affairs, Fred Mitchell. He spoke on behalf of the Bahamas last year. And actually, next slide, please. Actually, just some tips here for, I see this black thing over here, tips for covering the General Assembly and these such negotiations. Always find out who will be speaking on behalf of your country, because sometimes the presenters change. Because in my situation with the Bahamas last year, I was expecting my Prime Minister, go back please, my Prime Minister to speak, but last minute changes, the Minister of Foreign Affairs spoke. So you have to keep in contact with your delegation to find out, what meetings they're going to be attending, who's going to be speaking, if any changes are made to their schedules. Then get a list of speakers, find out the dates and time, the venue where they'll be speaking, and also to find out which events you want to cover. We heard a lot of events that's going to be happening at the SIDS4 conference. Which ones you want to cover that's interesting to you in your country, go after them. Also, country leaders, there are leaders in the region and around the world who you would want to hear from, who is going to probably give some more insight on something you've been covering. Check them off on your list, you want to follow them, and then show up on time for coverage, because sometimes, these venues can be really big and you can get lost. So try to find out, where will the meetings be held, how do I get there, things like that before you start. And then on the General Assembly day, that was the biggest week, actually, the week of the General Assembly. And when my Minister of Foreign Affairs spoke, I actually was in the General Assembly hall all day because I wanted to hear other Caribbean leaders who spoke, in addition for my stories. And my leader, he spoke during the night session, the evening session. So I had to be there all day from morning until night. So that was a bit grueling, and stay behind just to hear him speak. By the time he spoke, trust me, the place was partly empty, but I had to still be there because I'm from the Bahamas, I'm a journalist there, and I want to cover my leader as well. And then if you can, get a copy of speeches ahead of the presentations, like if you're a minister or Prime Minister will be presenting, try get a copy of his speech or her speech ahead of time so that you can start writing your stories early so that you can know what to expect. And then if you can, get interviews ahead also. Ask them to give you a sneak peek as to what they're going to be talking about, give you a head start. Now, some leaders have protocols whereby you have to contact their communications person or, whoever the PR is, and get permission to talk to them, or however it is. Find out all about that before you approach these persons so that you can be properly prepared. And then again, like we said earlier, do your research, get background information, collect data on topics you want of interest. You want to inform your reporting and give persons as much information as they can to understand and dissect what you're talking about. And then there are some stories that will be a focus to the SIDS conference, We heard it earlier, development financing, climate financing, the multi-dimensional vulnerability index that's going to determine countries in need of financing, renewed multilateralism, energy transition, renewable energy, biodiversity, ecosystem protection, closing the digital divide, sustainable economic development. Next slide. And before I even go there, I want journalists also to, there's something else I had added, to get exclusive stories. Try to get that story that no other news organization in your country has. Try to get that exclusive interview because I'm from a news organization where my editor, he loves exclusive stories. He don't want you could go to this event and cover the routine stories that's there, but he wants you to come back with a story that we could boast about. We could say, we got that story and you didn't get that story. So I want you to seek out exclusive stories, find out from your editor what he or she wants. They might could give you some tips. Also to keep your editors updated as to your progress, because you don't want to promise your editor you have a major interview with someone and they're expecting that for the evening news, and then that interview didn't go as planned. So please let them know that, if something happens or you weren't able to get the interview, keep them updated, communicate with them, and let them know what's happening while you're out there. Okay. And basically enjoy yourself at these conferences. It's going to be fun. Don't stress yourself out. Here, I have some tips here. Make new friends. Find time to write your stories because it can be overwhelming. It can be, so much things to do and you want to find out this and that, but find time to sit down and write your stories and get your reports in to meet your deadlines, because that's priority. Also network, meet other journalists, meet other experts in the UN who can be sources for you and give you, future advice and future information. Make sure you eat, make sure you're taking care of your body as well. Also to rest, get some rest, don't kill yourself out. Relax, and most of all, have fun. And the next slide. Thank you all so much for your time, and I hope to see you all in Antigua and Barbuda next week.
Thank you so much for your presentation. The floor is open now for questions. Please feel free to ask questions of any of the panelists to engage in discussion with the journalists. Now is your time.
So, is it my time to ask a question now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my question really is to one of the officials of ECLAC with regard to their assessment as to how the industrial world has met all of the commitments that they have made, perhaps not all, the commitments that they have made with regard to the whole exercise of climate change and all of that. Is there satisfaction amongst SIDS members with regard to how they have achieved, or have they achieved? And is there an understanding? Do you feel there is an understanding amongst industrial world leaders that climate change has to do not only with SIDS countries, but rather with the industrial world? And I'm talking beyond nice commitments and nice language and so on. I'm talking about the nitty-gritty reality of them achieving what they have promised to do.
Diane, are you there? And can you tackle that question for us?
So that question is the heart of the COP. And there were colleagues who were saying that, well, COP is not the only talk in town, but it is perhaps the most vital for us in the Caribbean, exactly for that question, because the developed countries, and we constantly say it, we are not the ones creating the challenge, but we are the ones feeling the impact. The short answer to the question from the gentleman is no. We have not seen from the industrial countries because of the implication, and this is why we're now talking about just transition. We had that adage 1.5 to stay alive. It's not happening. We're now estimating that it's going to be over 2, 2.1 that we are looking at, and that is going to mean that sea level rise is going to be exponential, unless we can bring what it is to bring the levels of GHG in the atmosphere down to levels below what it was pre-industrialization, which was like 17 something in the 18th century. So it's a real challenge, and the implication is we need to move away from fossil-fueled industrialization. And that is what I think somebody also said that during the course of our discussion this morning. No, our economies still subsist, even in the Caribbean, are still run by fossil fuel, because alternate energy, solar energy, wind, all of these require a dramatic change in the engine room, in the source of energy production in order to run industry. And the industrialized countries depend almost, well, they're doing better, particularly some in Europe, doing better in investing in various sources of alternate energy. But we are still globally a fossil fuel-based global economy. And it is the industrial countries that carry the majority of that. And that is a challenge. And until the governments of those industrial countries make a real commitment to what we're describing as just transition, which is we need to get to that point where we have net zero carbon in the economies being produced, and that is going to reduce the level of carbon greenhouse gases in the economy. We are not going to achieve, and they continue to find ways to get around the commitment. They want to buy the clean energy, the clean air from those countries that don't produce a lot of carbon and so on, rather than focusing on addressing the reduction of fuel-based production in their economies. That is the fundamental challenge, and that is the one that has not been addressed adequately by the industrialized countries. And that's the reason why I think there was some discussion about the loss and damage fund that the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda put to the, I think it was like 2-3 COPs ago, that says, look, if you guys are not prepared to do the due diligence to reduce the amount of continued investment in carbon-fueled, fossil-fueled production, then you are going to pay the consequences of it. So the loss and damage says, because of fossil fuel production, our countries are suffering, and you're going to pay for that cost. That's where we are. And surprisingly, that loss and damage fund was adopted conceptually the very first time it was presented, and we've got to the point where we're actually operationalizing it, which means that these industrialized countries are actually more prepared to pay the consequences of their fossil-based industry rather than to make the effort to invest in alternate energy. And that's a serious issue that needs to be addressed. And I am certain it's going to be discussed at SIDS. But the solution really lies with, and part of the problem too is, and I know I need to stop talking, part of the challenge is that it's not so much the governments as the private sector, because it's the big business. And, you know, big business across the world has more resources than the governments. And so it is for the governments to convince the big business. And this is why it's important to have the private sector also engaged in these discussions, the business forum, the private sector forum, all of these discussions, because you need to make these decision makers aware of the implications. It's not just about the bottom line. You have countries that are going to disappear if you continue with your irresponsible actions. All of that discussion that needs to happen, but it's a work in progress. The only thing that you can do is to continue the debate, continue the discussion, to advocate, and where possible, you know, introduce those measures. You talk about the carrot and the stick. I think we need bigger sticks, quite honestly, to ensure that there is a greater level of movement towards just transition and mitigation, climate mitigation.
A follow-up question, which involves two countries in the Caribbean and more, but immediately Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed developing countries, which have the fossil fuel resources and are now attempting to take charge of them to enter the development of their countries and their peoples, but they are faced with the same problem of overstepping the crease, as it were.
Yes, I can say that Guyana, and let me see, because a lot of it also requires investment in technology, because it's a technology that facilitates the translation of the fossil fuel-based economy to the alternate energy sources, requires huge investment in technology. And Trinidad and Tobago, I think, has been very effective communicating that, yeah, you want us to go that way, you got to support us in investing in that technology. That is, again, the whole issue of finance, because climate finance is not only for adaptation, which most of the Caribbean, most of the SIDS are concerned about adaptation, but mitigation is important for Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, because it says, look, you want us to lower the amount of dependence on fossil fuel-based investment, then you need to help us to invest in the technologies that facilitate the transition to alternate energy. That's the climate mitigation investment. And Trinidad and Tobago has been working in that way. Guyana, with its new wealth, actually has the resources to do it. And there has been a commitment expressed by the leadership of Guyana that they will move in that direction. So let's see. It's something that, I don't know, they're the ones with the money. They say who pays the piper calls the tune. So these guys have the funds. They are going to be the ones to take the leadership. But CARICOM is committed to entreating on Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana for that leadership within the context of our region to see how we invest in greater mitigation. In other words, they are not going to obliviously pursue fossil fuel-based production without making that effort to move towards transitioning to alternate energy sources. And it's just for the region as a whole to encourage that. And we have to lead by example. Even those that don't have fossil fuel-based economies depend on imported fossil fuels to run their economies. We need to reduce those imports and to move towards investment in alternate energy. Barbados has definitely shown leadership in terms of the percentage of their industries that are solar-based. Guyana has hydro. So there are other sources that are being used well in the region, and we need to see how we scale those up. But it's a work in progress.
Thanks, Director. I saw a hand up from the floor from Tamara. Tamara, if you are still there, you can jump in with your question now.
Hi, good day from Jamaica. Sorry, I put a question in the chat and I was just hoping that maybe some media personnel can respond to it just for my knowledge and assistance. I work at the International Seabed Authority based in the library here. And often, and I think it was, I can't remember, but one of the journalists was speaking about preparing for sessions and making sure that you do your research, you do your reading and that sort of thing. The question basically was, how can libraries support this process? Thank you.
Ryan, Deandre, if you're available there to respond to that question, that would be ideal. We'd love to have your input at this point. Let us know if you need the question repeated. In the meantime, we have a question from Diane Quarless. Yes, you could go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Diane Squires from Diane and Squires Consulting. I'm a communications specialist working here in the Caribbean in Barbados. And my question is, I think for Tumasie, if there was a wish list of key messages that you would want to see coming out of SIDS4, what would that list be like? What would those key messages be? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Tumasie had to step away. He's very busy, but now that we have your question, we will get to him and get that message out to you and to all of the attendees here, because apart from everything that you've heard and discussed today, we here at ECLAC Caribbean and UNIC Caribbean have put together, and we are still in the process of assembling everything, a little bit of a media coverage cheat sheet of all of the important things, important times, important resources that you may need, and we'll certainly get those key messages out that SIDS want, especially Caribbean SIDS, out onto that cheat sheet. Any other questions that we need to take? Ryan or Deandre, I don't know if you're available to respond to the question now about how libraries can facilitate preparation for journalists in the lead up to these conferences.
Yeah, I could take a stab at it, Jabari. Mainly because I must be honest with you. It's a good point and something I really haven't thought about up until this point, because most of the research that I do, it really focuses maybe on the internet and resources like Director Quarless and others, as opposed to a library. But it's a very interesting point that she raises. I believe it was Tamara that brought it up. I would say, and it brings me to think that some of the essential tools beyond just, I don't know, climate change books and resources would include, certainly, I would say, the country's NDCs. So let's just take, for example, maybe Guyana or Trinidad and Tobago or Barbuda or Jamaica, whatever the nationally determined contributions that have been set out and set by that country. I think that's a great resource for a library to have, so that, and it has to be updated obviously on a year-to-year basis, or biannual basis. But certainly the NDCs is a great resource to have. There are not journalists, there are negotiators and climate officials from these countries writing books, if not scholarly articles, on a year-to-year basis. They literally do this on a year-to-year basis. Some of them write books annually as climate change revolutionizes and coverage of climate change revolutionizes. They write to keep up with those trends. I would also say, from a CARICOM perspective, I would say that's also a great resource to have within a library, to have these books that these experts and these industry experts, like Director Quarless, she, I'm sure, has access and knows a lot of the content that emerges out of the Eastern Caribbean. I would say that is also really good material to have. And this is obviously beyond the environmental books and beyond the climate change resources and tools that are already readily available. But those two would certainly be my suggestions. The nationally determined contributions of each country should be accessible to everybody in the public domain who wants it at a national public library, and as well as, I would say, resources that our people in the Caribbean have written and have produced should also be included. And I saw Director Quarless also has a hand up, so I'm figuring that she also has some good information as well.
Diane?
Yes, thank you very much. There was great contribution there, and I just wanted to add to it, because yes, the NDC is a good addition to libraries, but not just NDC, because as you say, there are a number of development platforms that are critical to the sustainable development strategy. Well, you have national sustainable development strategies that are that have been adopted by most of the countries. At least 9 of our member states have national sustainable development strategies that describe, this is within the context of Agenda 2030, that describe what the objectives of the countries are in all the various sectors. And that allows for any scholar or worker practitioner to see what are the priorities that have been established by the member states. You have the climate, the COP, the Paris commitment, which is the landmark, and those that have been adopted afterwards. The disaster risk reduction. You have you call it the Sendai framework that speaks about what we need to do to build resilience to risk. in the Caribbean, another critical area, and it is not just about environmental risk, it's economic and social risk as well. So the UNDR Sendai framework is important. There are resolutions adopted by the General Assembly every year on SIDS. We have one that's adopted on the Caribbean Sea. These are things that should be in our libraries so that people can always reach out and get a sense of what the global community is saying or what is important to us at the international level. And then, of course, regional outcomes as well. As has just been said, what comes out of the OECS, the Eastern Caribbean things, CARICOM heads of government statements to communicate. I'm always at the edge of my seat, waiting to hear what is in the communique adopted at the end of a CARICOM heads meeting. Our library should have that information because our people need to know what our heads are saying, what they have established as priority, because that determines then what we follow. So the role of the library, an extremely critical thing. Of course, you have to encourage people to go in them. You know, folks have stopped going in the libraries because TikTok have taken over people's lives. So the libraries also need to figure out how they get some of their information into TikTok.
And don't, just real quick, Jabari, don't underestimate and undervalue the resource of newspaper articles tomorrow. I think if we can have, that's a great resource for people to go back and see when there have been disasters, what it cost, the information that that first draft of history that journalists write. Don't underestimate that, as well as collecting that information on a climate change disaster to disaster basis is really good.
I think I just want to make a little plug here, and I think it's very important, but ECLAC has a digital repository of research going back for many years, of current research, of policy briefs, and many of these development agencies, both in the region and globally, have dashboards online that you can get different bits of information and manipulate the data a bit to get some of the research that you need to get done. So I think that's also a very important tool. I'm wearing a journalist cap here and I'm wearing my ECLAC cap at the same time. So I think if you have access to, if you get access, it's in the link there to the ECLAC digital repository. That's very interesting. And look out for more dashboards that exist. Tamara, you have any useful resources there that you'd like to add? Tamara, you want to add something? Yeah.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Still getting accustomed to the technology. Yeah, I put our link there, and thanks so much for the shout out to libraries, to ECLAC, and to the International Seabed Authority. You can check our digital repository. And thanks, Ryan, for the suggestion on the newspaper articles and archives, which will be useful to journalists. I think these are really important tools, and it's important to hear from the users what they need, because as librarians and information specialists, we think we're doing the work of the user, but it's always great to hear from the users themselves. So I'll be sure to be adding information to our collection. I'm asking you to check our collection. And as Diane said, maybe not all of us are on TikTok, but we're in our libraries and we're trying our best to get the information out to the persons that need it the most. So thanks for this session today, and thanks for the response.
Thank you. We have a question from Shama Leslie. Go ahead. As quickly as possible.
All right. Hello. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. Perfect. Well, since you're on the topic of like additional information, part of the presentation earlier from Tumasie, he was mentioning the SIDS Center of Excellence to be opened in Antigua, and he was talking about information about negotiation of debt clauses and providing a platform that will be free of cost for SIDS states and all of that. I wanted to know, where can I go to research and read more about that and follow up on additional information, etc.
Thank you very much for that question. We will get all of the information and resources to you when we send out our cheat sheet on coverage and on SIDS issues. It's a sort of real resource that you can depend on as a collation of everything that exists on SIDS and where to find important information and data that you may need. Any other questions before we move on to one final very brief presentation on the OPCC? Nothing else from the floor. Since we don't have anything else from the floor, I'd like to just introduce to you the next speaker we have, who is Jonatas De Paula, who is here at ECLAC. and he's going to present on the Parliamentary Observatory on Climate Change and Just Transition. They are going to have a side event at SIDS4, an event that you may be interested in covering. And if you can't get to SIDS4 to cover it, you can definitely reach out to Jonathan to find out a bit more about this initiative. Jonathan?
Thank you so much, Jabari. Can you see my screen and my slide being projected?
We can see it. Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this workshop and to speak about the OPCC, which in Spanish stands for the Parliamentary Observatory on Climate Change and Just Transition. We all know that the impacts of climate change are deep in our economies, in our society and infrastructure, and we need to fast adapt to mitigate those impacts. But it's not just the infrastructure that needs adapting. National legal frameworks also need to evolve to be responsive and fit for purpose to address these new realities. That's why parliamentarians from all over the region created the OPCC in 2021. And today it will be defined as a network of lawmakers and government technical officers that seek to bolster environmental and climate change legislation in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's truly space for collaboration for parliamentarians to create and share knowledge and work together. And currently the OPCC has 26 participating parliamentarians from 15 countries. The launch of the OPCC Legislative Data Tracker, which you can see showing on the screen, was a major milestone for the OPCC in 2023. It's an online database with over 2,000 environmental and climate change laws and bills from 21 countries, including 9 from the Caribbean. It features indicators, graphs, comparable data presented in interactive dashboards. It's a powerful knowledge resource that allows for analysis and an overview of the state of climate change legislation in the region. I invite you all to explore this online platform. Now, we are also going to be at SIDS4. We're organizing a side event, and you can see on the screen the details for the side event. And we have asked panelists to present case of the legislation and how they can play a key role in catalyzing climate finance in Caribbean SIDS. It's an excellent lineup of speakers who confirm participation. We have the Premier of the British Virgin Islands, the Vice Minister for Climate Change of Dominican Republic, the Minister for Climate Resilience of Grenada, a Member of Parliament of Curacao, and many other authorities. So I invite you journalists to attending SIDS4 event to cover our event. I'll be on the ground and available to connect with you, with one of our panelists or parliamentarians, if you wish. And also available to make a connection with one of our participants after the conference, if you want to write about us. I'm gonna leave on the chat my contact details. You can also see on the screen, and also a link to our media advisory with more information about our event to journalists. Jabari, colleagues from Munich, thanks a lot for the opportunity.
No problem. Thank you to you for presenting. So we've had a marathon session today. We've gone over time. I want to thank all of you. Unless there is any final super quick comment or question that you'd like to input, I'd like to thank all of you we have one from Director Quarless. Yes, please go ahead, Diane.
Thank you, Jabari. Really, just to thank you all for this, I think, very timely, very important session, and really long overdue. I wanted to throw out a challenge because what is adopted, the outcome document, in Antigua and Barbuda next week, will be ultimately ratified by the General Assembly in September. So everything that we adopt, the ABAS, that is adopted next week, will then be presented to the General Assembly in September for, call it, ratification. So I'm throwing this challenge out to the media of the region to keep the SIDS agenda alive between now, Antigua, all the way to the General Assembly in September. And I'm inviting Liliana and Jabari to collaborate with all of you to see how you periodically hold sessions that focus on a series of critical issues that are on the agenda of the ABAS and that are of relevance and to the SIDS. I don't know, one a month, so however you find it relevant, bringing on board speakers and so on, that allows for the media to be fully engaged substantively in the critical issues that we have going forward, so that you don't get everything in one, because it's a real mouthful. And therefore, if you are able to have a regular engagement, issue by issue, taking us all the way to September, then by the time we get there, there is a real full appreciation of what SIDS are about. Eye on the Islands. This is lovely. And so that is my appeal to all of you. Yeah, along with the storytelling and the whole idea of what would the world be like without islands. You know, let's communicate to the region and to the wider community what that really means. So I want to thank you all for this session. I think it's extremely important and very timely. Thanks.
We just, while that image you were seeing on your screens there was part of our campaign, Imagine a World Without Islands. I encourage you to look at it on social media, on our channels, ECLAC's channels, unique channels on social media. Liliana has something that you'd like to say?
Yeah, thank you, Jabari. Thanks, Diane. No, just only want to say gracias a los colegas del SINU México por haber transmitido este webinar en español. Nos informan que tuvimos más de 70 personas conectadas en la cuenta de X del SINU México. So, muchas gracias a las personas que estuvieron también conectadas en esta transmisión que se hizo a través del SINU México en español. Y gracias, thank you to everyone, to the journalists, and good luck with the people that are traveling to Antigua and Barbuda and send us great stories about the things that are happening there. And thanks.
Thanks again. Imagine a World Without Islands. It's our campaign on social media. Don't be shy. Please participate and give your favorite island memory or your favorite thing about your island, or tell us what your fears are about imagining a world without islands. Thanks once again for attending, and thanks for your patience and for staying this extra time. Have a good day. Thank you to everyone involved. Take care.
Thank you. Only to see.